The auctioneer's voice carried across the community center parking lot, thin and bright in the cold November air, a practiced cadence of numbers rising by increments of $50. Inside, folding chairs scraped linoleum. Paddles lifted. A photograph waited on a table near the exit, face down. Nora Gillette stood at the back of the room in a blue cardigan that had been washed so many times the cuffs had gone white at the edges. She was 73 years old, and she held her hands very still in front of her, the way a person holds themselves when they have learned that stillness is the last dignity available to them. Her eyes tracked the auctioneer without expression. On the table beside her, arranged in a clear plastic tray, were 2 leather dress belts, a pocket watch with a cracked crystal, and a folded dress uniform still in its dry-cleaning bag. And in the center of the tray, in a hinged display box lined with faded velvet, sat a silver star. If this story lands somewhere in you, consider staying close to this channel. There are more stories like this one, and they deserve to be told. Cade Merritt had been parked across the street for 11 minutes, which was 9 minutes longer than he had intended. He had stopped for coffee at the gas station 2 blocks down. He had intended to drink it in the truck and move on. He was passing through Heller, Montana, the way he had been passing through most places since the discharge, with the loose forward motion of a man who has confused movement with purpose. His German shepherd, a large black and tan working dog named Grip, sat upright in the passenger seat. Grip was 7 years old, retired from a single deployment, and a year of facility work. And he had learned over the course of his life that the moments worth paying attention to usually announce themselves not with noise but with stillness. He had gone very still. Cade was 41 years old, broad through the chest and shoulders, standing just under 6 feet 2 inches with the kind of posture that does not relax indoors or out. His hair was dark and cut short, going silver at the temples and along the jaw where 3 days of beard had come in. He had a thin horizontal scar along the right side of his chin from a training incident in 2009, and a second scar, smaller, at the outer corner of his left eye. His face in repose was not unkind, but it was not easy either. It was the face of someone who had developed the habit of watching exits. He had not meant to read the sign on the community center door. He had not meant to recognize what was happening inside. Estate sale, it said. Personal effects and memorabilia. He had read it once, and then looked away, and then read it again, and something in his chest had gone the same quality of still that Grip had gone, and he had been sitting in the truck for 11 minutes, trying to decide if it was his business. He got out of the truck. He told Grip to stay, and then reconsidered, and held the door while Grip dropped to the pavement and fell in at his left heel without being asked. The community center smelled of drip coffee and old floor wax and the particular staleness of a building that does not get used enough. There were perhaps 40 people inside, most of them browsers, a few with the focused posture of buyers who had done their research. The auctioneer, a heavy-set man in his 50s named Harold Bent, was working through a box of kitchen items with the efficiency of someone who has learned to keep the numbers moving. Cade stopped inside the door. He looked at Nora Gillette before he looked at anything else, because Grip had looked at her first, and Cade had learned over the course of 2 years of working alongside this dog that Grip's assessments were rarely wrong. Grip did not move toward her. He stood with his ears forward and his weight centered, watching her with the patient attention he gave to people in distress. It was a different posture than the one he held for threats. Nora was not a threat. She was a woman standing in a great deal of pain and trying not to let anyone see it. Cade walked to the side table and looked at the items in the tray. He looked at the silver star. He picked up the display box and turned it over and read the inscription on the back plate. A name, a date, a campaign theater that Cade recognized not from briefings or books, but from the particular quality of dust it left in his lungs even years later. He set it down carefully. He looked at Nora. She was watching him with the expression of someone who has learned to expect to be disappointed by strangers and is in the process of confirming that expectation. She was a small woman with white hair cut close to her head and brown eyes that had the depth of someone who had spent a long time listening. There were fine lines around her mouth that had been put there by grief, not laughter, though she looked like the kind of person who had once laughed easily. She wore a plain gold ring on her left hand. She had been wearing it for a long time. "That's your husband's," Cade said. It was not a question. Nora looked at him for a long moment. "Was," she said. He extended his hand. "Cade Merritt. I'm not from here." She shook it. "Nora, I'm not from here either anymore." She looked around the room with a kind of exhausted irony. "Though I suppose technically I am." Grip sat down beside Cade's left boot. Nora looked at the dog, and something shifted fractionally in her face. "He's calm," she said. "He usually is," Cade said. "Around people he respects." Nora looked at Cade again. Her chin moved. It was a very small movement, the kind a person makes when they are deciding whether to say a thing they have been holding for a long time. "My son arranged this," she said. "Dennis. He said there were debts. He said it was necessary." She paused. "Warren wouldn't have wanted this. Warren never would have sold that metal. He wouldn't have sold it for anything in the world." Cade looked back at the display case. The auctioneer had moved on from the kitchen items and was now working through what Harold Bent was cheerfully calling the sporting goods. "How much time before they get to the memorabilia table?" Cade said. 40 minutes, maybe less," Nora said. "Harold moves fast." Cade nodded once. "Tell me about the debts," he said. Nora was quiet for a moment. She had the manner of someone who has been told repeatedly and recently that their opinions on financial matters are not useful. She pressed her lips together and then seemed to decide that this particular stranger was not like the others who had told her that. "Dennis took out a line of credit against the house," she said, "in my name. I didn't know about it until 3 months ago. He said it was for a business venture. He said Warren's estate would cover it." She paused. "Warren's estate was the house, and his personal effects, and whatever was in a checking account that Dennis also had access to." Cade looked at her. "How much?" $41,000, she said. "Against a house that's worth perhaps 70. "And the proceeds from today?" "Go to Dennis," she said. "To cover the line of credit. To cover his fees for managing the estate." She looked at the floor. "He's a licensed estate administrator. It's all very legal, apparently." Grip pressed his shoulder against Cade's left leg, and Cade reached down and set his hand briefly on the dog's neck. He picked up the display case again and turned it over and read the inscription one more time. "Warren Allen Gillette, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, April 14th, 2003. Ramadi." He set the case down. "I'm going to step outside for a few minutes," he said. "Will you stay here?" Nora looked at him steadily. "Where else would I go?" she said. Outside, the cold hit with the force of a Montana November. Flat-bottom clouds the color of old pewter stacked low over the mountains to the north. Cade stood beside his truck and made 2 phone calls. The first was to a woman named Becca Marsh, who had been a legal aid coordinator in Missoula for 11 years and owed Cade a favor that he had never collected. The second was to a man named Glenn Pritchard, who had been a county clerk in Cascade County for 22 years, and whose memory for property records was encyclopedic, and whose patience for what he called creative estate management was extremely limited. He also took a photograph. He had learned in the Marine Corps that documentation is not glamorous and is not the thing anyone tells stories about, but it is almost always the thing that matters. He photographed the inscription on the back of the Silver Star's display case. He photographed the sale manifest he found on the sign-in table near the door, which listed every item for auction and its estimated value, and the name of the estate administrator of record. Dennis Allen Gillette. Licensed, all in order. He photographed that too. Back inside, he found Nora where he had left her. Grip went to her immediately this time without being told, and sat beside her and looked up at her with the attentive stillness of a dog who has decided something. Nora looked down at him and then reached out and put her hand on his head very gently, the way a person does when they are afraid of being refused, and Grip leaned slightly into her hand. "He's a good judge," Kate said. Nora said. She kept her hand on the dog's head. "My husband had a dog. Not this kind. A brown mutt named Sargent. Warren said naming a dog Sargent was either the most respectful thing you could do or the least, and he never decided which." Kate almost smiled. "Tell me about Warren," he said. She told him. Not everything, and not in order, the way people tell things when they've been keeping them to themselves for a long time, and suddenly have an audience they trust. Warren Gillette had been born in Heller in 1948. He had enlisted in 1968 and served 2 tours, come home with both his legs and a compressed silence about what those tours had cost him. He had driven a grain truck for a decade, then started a small tractor repair business that had done well enough to buy the house on Birch and put 2 children through school. Dennis was the younger of 2. The older, a daughter named Carla, had moved to Portland after college and visited when she could afford the ticket. Warren had died of a heart attack 18 months ago, quietly, in his recliner, at 74 years old. "He was watching a baseball game," Nora said. "He always fell asleep in the 3rd inning. I thought he'd fallen asleep." She stopped. "That medal," she said. "He got it for pulling 2 men out of a burning vehicle. He never talked about it. He said the right people already knew what happened, and the wrong people didn't need to." She was quiet for a moment. "He kept it in his sock drawer. In that case, for 50 years he kept it in his sock drawer." Cade looked at the Silver Star on the side table. He understood something then, not as a thought, but as a feeling that settled in his chest and stayed there. The medal did not belong to Dennis Gillette. It did not belong to the estate. It had never belonged to anything so provisional as an estate. It belonged to the category of things that a person earns in the worst moment of their life, at a cost that cannot be measured in dollars, and that no line of credit and no estate administrator's licensing and no sale manifest could transfer to anyone. The auctioneer moved through a set of vintage tools. Cade looked at the photograph he had taken of the inscription. He looked at the sale manifest. He looked at the display case. Then he walked to the sign-in table and wrote his name and phone number on a card and asked the volunteer there, a teenager who looked deeply uncertain about everything, where he could find Dennis Gillette. "He's in the back," the teenager said. "He usually comes out after they start the main items." Cade thanked him and went back to Nora. "Is Carla reachable?" he said. Nora looked at him. "Yes," she said slowly. "She and Dennis don't speak. She tried to contest the estate administration, and he had a lawyer send her a letter." "Do you have her number?" Nora reached into the pocket of her cardigan and produced a phone that was 4 or 5 years old. She scrolled with careful deliberation and read out a number. Cade put it in his phone. "Do you own anything else?" he said. "Beyond the house?" "I have my car," Nora said. "A 2012 Buick, and whatever is in my personal checking account, which Dennis does not have access to." She paused. "I made sure of that after." "How much is in it?" she told him. It was not a large number, but it was not nothing. "All right," Cade said. He looked toward the back of the room where a door stood slightly ajar, and the sound of a brief phone conversation was audible. "What does Dennis look like?" "Tall," Nora said. "Like his father, but thinner. He wears his hair combed back. He'll be in a sport coat. He always wears a sport coat to these things. He thinks it reads as professional." She said the last word with a flatness that contained a great deal of information. The door at the back of the room opened. Dennis was 46 years old, 6 feet even, lean in a way that read as careful management rather than natural build. He wore a gray sport coat over a white button-down, and his dark hair was combed back from a high forehead. He had a pleasant face, the kind of face that had been trained to signal ease, and his eyes moved across the room in a practiced inventory that paused briefly on his mother, moved on, and then came back and stopped when they found Cade. Grip did not growl. He did something quieter than a growl. He went very still, and his ears flattened slightly, and he held that stillness with the quality of a coiled thing, not threatening, but present in a way that was impossible to ignore. Dennis crossed the room. He smiled at his mother and then extended his hand to Cade. "Dennis," he said, "you're interested in the estate sale?" "I'm interested in the Silver Star," Cade said. He did not take the extended hand immediately. He let the Paws sit there for a moment, then he shook it briefly. "Cade?" "Ah." Dennis's eyes moved to the display case and back. "Beautiful piece of history. My father was a man of great character." "Staff Sergeant Warren Gillette," Cade said. "Ramadi, 2003. He pulled 2 men out of a burning vehicle under fire." He watched Dennis's face carefully. "You know the circumstances under which he earned it?" Dennis hesitated. It was a very small hesitation, the kind that a practiced person could make almost invisible. "Of course," he said. "We're very proud of his service." "The medal isn't estate property," Cade said. The pleasant face held steady. "I assure you it is. My attorneys have reviewed the estate inventory in full." "Under federal law," Cade said, "military decorations awarded to a service member belong to the recipient, and, upon their death, pass to the next of kin as designated in the recipient's final disposition instructions or, absent those, to the surviving spouse." He spoke evenly, without heat. "Your mother is the surviving spouse." Dennis looked at Nora with the practiced expression of a man who has had this conversation in a rehearsed form and is accessing the rehearsal. "Mom, we discussed this. The estate administrator has the authority to include personal property in the liquidation to satisfy estate debts. That includes personal effects." "A military decoration is not a personal effect under the relevant statutes," Cade said. "Mr. Merritt," Dennis said pleasantly, "I don't know what your background is, but my attorneys are quite thorough." Cade took out his phone. He found the photograph of the inscription. He held it so Dennis could see it clearly. "I'm going to make a suggestion," Cade said. "You remove the Silver Star from the sale manifest before Harold gets to the memorabilia table. You contact your attorney this afternoon and ask them to confirm the applicable federal statutes on disposition of military decorations to surviving spouses, and you arrange for your mother's personal items to be returned to her directly. He put the phone away. That's the first thing. Dennis's pleasant expression had not changed, but it had thinned. And the second thing, he said. The line of credit, Cade said. The one in your mother's name, secured against her home, that she did not knowingly authorize. A silence. My mother has some difficulty, Dennis said carefully, with complex financial documents. I'm sure she does, Cade said. Most people do. That's why there are statutes against obtaining a signature on a credit instrument from an elderly person who doesn't fully understand the terms. Dennis looked at his mother. His expression had moved past practiced pleasantness into something that was not quite anger, but was adjacent to it. Mom, he said. Don't, Nora said quietly. Her voice was steady. Don't say my name like that. Grip had not moved. He sat at Cade's left heel with his ears slightly forward and his eyes on Dennis, with a calm attention that seemed to make Dennis uncomfortable in a way he could not account for. I have copies of the sale manifest, Cade said. I have photographs of the estate inventory. I've already spoken with a legal aid coordinator in Missoula who would like to see the credit authorization documents when they're available. He paused. I've also spoken with a county clerk who has some questions about the deed filing timeline on this property. Dennis looked at him steadily. Who are you? He said. I told you, Cade said. I'm Cade. I was passing through. The auctioneer's voice climbed to close out the sporting goods lot. 8 minutes, maybe 10, until the memorabilia table. Dennis was a man who had learned to work within systems, to stay just inside lines, to layer the paperwork until the paperwork itself became the answer. He was not stupid, and he was not, Cade thought, entirely without feeling. There was something in his face, looking at his mother, that might have been shame, or might have been the precursor to it. Something undecided. Shame and the decision to do the right thing are not the same thing, and Cade had been in enough rooms to know the difference. This is a legal estate administration, Dennis said. Then you have nothing to worry about, Cade said. A long moment. I'll remove the decoration from the manifest, Dennis said finally. As a courtesy, given the questions you've raised. That's appreciated, Cade said. Dennis turned to Harold and crossed the room and spoke to him in a low voice. Harold made a note on his clipboard. Dennis came back. The Silver Star won't be auctioned, he said. He looked at Nora. His jaw moved. There was the undecided thing in his face again, the thing that had not yet decided what it was. The credit issue is more complex, he said. Becca Marsh will call you Monday, Cade said. She's very good at complexity. Dennis looked at him one more time, and then he went back through the door at the back of the room, and the latch clicked behind him. Nora let out a breath. It was a long, slow breath, the kind a person lets out after they have been holding themselves very carefully for a very long time. She looked at the side table, at the display case with the Silver Star still in it. He's not a bad person, she said. He's a frightened person who made bad decisions and then kept making them because the alternative was admitting to the first one. Cade looked at her. That's a generous read. I'm his mother, she said. I'm allowed. She reached down and put her hand on Grip's head again. The dog leaned into her hand again. She looked at him for a long moment. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes, Cade said. Why did you stop? He thought about it. I saw the sign on the door, he said. And I recognized what was in that display case before I walked in. You've seen Silver Stars before? I've seen what they cost, he said. Nora nodded once, slowly. Warren would have liked you, she said. He didn't trust people who were easy to read. He said the ones worth knowing took a minute. She paused. You took 11. The auction continued around them. A cedar hope chest went for 140. A set of wooden-handled kitchen tools went for 30. Harold moved through his manifest with the cheerful efficiency of a man who has found his calling. Carla Gillette called back at 2:10 from a lunch break at the architectural firm where she worked. She was 49 years old, and she had her mother's voice, direct and without cushion, and she listened to Cade's summary of the situation in a silence that he recognized as the silence of someone absorbing something they had suspected but had not yet been told directly. I've been trying to get hold of the credit documents for 3 months, she said. Dennis's attorney keeps sending responses that don't contain the actual documents. Becca, Cade said, write that down. He could hear Carla writing it. Who are you? She said. Are you local? I was passing through, Cade said. A pause. Do you know what the definition of passing through is? Carla said. Yes, he said. It means you leave, she said. Are you going to leave? He looked across the room. Nora was sitting now in one of the folding chairs near the back wall, with Grip sitting close to her left side and her hand resting on the dog's back. She was watching the auction without expression. But the quality of stillness she was holding now was different from the one she'd held when he walked in. The first had been the stillness of someone trying to disappear. This one was quieter and had something underneath it that might eventually become rest. Not today, he said. He stayed through the end of the auction. He helped Nora carry the remaining boxes of Warren's personal items to her Buick. The dress uniform, the pocket watch, the belts, the display case with the silver star, which Nora held against her chest with both arms for a moment before placing it on the back seat with the careful deliberateness of someone handling something irreplaceable. Harold found Cade near the door as the volunteers were folding chairs. Dennis pulled the medal, Harold said. He was looking at Cade with the frankly appraising gaze of a man who has seen a lot of estates and knows when something unusual has happened. That was the highest value item on the manifest. It wasn't his to sell, Cade said. Harold studied him for a moment. You want some leftover coffee, Harold said. It's terrible. Sure, Cade said. They stood near the folding table with the coffee urn and drank terrible coffee. And Harold told him about Heller, which was not a large town and was not a famous town, but had its specific qualities. The way small towns do, its specific histories and its specific people and its specific way of dealing with things that were not right. The grain elevator had been there since 1931. The hardware store had changed hands twice but never closed. People remembered things here, Harold said, in the particular way that towns with long memories do, not always charitably, but always honestly. Harold had auctioned perhaps a dozen estates in Heller over the years, and he had done it, he said, with what he considered appropriate care for the people involved. He had his rules about it. He would not auction anything he believed had sentimental value to a surviving spouse unless that spouse was present and confirmed the sale. He had pulled items before. Once he had stopped a whole auction and sent everyone home, and he still thought he had been right to do it. I didn't know about the credit issue, Harold said. I run the auction, not the administration. I know, Cade said. If I'd known, Harold said, I would have made some calls. I believe you, Cade said. Harold looked at his cup. Warren fixed my tractor, he said. 1996. I'd run the thing into a ditch and bent something in the undercarriage that I couldn't name, and he named it in about 4 seconds and had it straight in under an hour. He didn't charge me what it was worth. He paused. I always figured I owed him something. Cade said nothing. Harold refilled his cup. You got somewhere to be? Cade looked at his truck through the glass door. Grip was visible through the windshield, alert and watchful. Not precisely, Cade said. Harold nodded thoughtfully. There's a diner on 5th called Hallie's. The owner, Hallie Brandt, makes a beef stew on Fridays that has been scientifically proven to be the best thing in the county. I'm not a scientist. I'm just reporting what people say. Cade said he would consider it. He found Nora in the parking lot standing beside her Buick, looking at the mountains to the north. The clouds had thinned to the west, and there was a strip of pale gold light along the horizon that had not been there an hour ago, thin and cold and precise. Carla is going to call you this evening, he said. She's going to come out next weekend if you'll have her. Nora was quiet for a moment. It's been 2 years since she's been home, she said. I know. Nora looked at the light on the mountains. I made the guest room into a sewing room, she said. I'll have to move things. She'll help you move things, Cade said. Nora nodded. She reached into her purse and found a card, one of those simple printed ones with just a name and phone number, slightly bent at one corner. She held it out to him. That's my number, she said. In case Becca needs me to sign anything or provide documentation or whatever it is people need. He took the card. She looked at him for a moment with the deep brown eyes that had been doing a great deal of work today. Warren pulled 2 men out of a burning vehicle, she said. That's what the citation said. 2 men he didn't know particularly well in a place he never expected to be on a day he hadn't chosen. She paused. He never thought of it as heroism. He thought of it as what a person does. Cade said nothing. I imagine you know what I mean by that, she said. Yes, he said. She touched his arm briefly. A light pressure. The kind that says what a longer conversation would only dilute. Then she got into the Buick and backed carefully out of the parking space and drove toward Birch Street. Grip came to Cade's side and sat. The light on the mountains held for another few minutes and then faded. Cade stood in the parking lot with his dog and looked at the community center, at the folding chairs visible through the glass doors, at the side table where the display case had sat that morning with its hinged velvet interior and its 50 years of deserved obscurity. He thought about what Nora had said, what a person does. He had not, in the years since the discharge, found a reliable answer to the question of what a person does when the structure that told them what to do was gone. He had moved from place to place with the theory that the answer was somewhere ahead of him. That movement itself was a form of searching. He had been wrong about that, probably. Movement was just movement. Answers were in rooms, not in roads. Answers were in a woman's voice telling the truth about a man who kept his medal in a sock drawer for 50 years, not because he was ashamed of it, but because some things belong to the private part of a life and not the public one. Becca called him at 4 that afternoon to confirm she'd received the photographs and the sale manifest details and would be reaching out to Dennis's attorney on Monday morning. She had, in the course of her 11 years doing this work, seen variations on this situation perhaps a dozen times. She was not optimistic in a cheerful way. She was optimistic in a working way, which meant she had already begun pulling the applicable statutes and had a call scheduled with a colleague who specialized in elder financial exploitation. Glenn Pritchard called at 5 to say that the deed filing on the Gillette property on Birch Street had a detail he intended to look at more carefully. He did not elaborate. Glenn never elaborated until he was certain. Cade ate dinner at Hallie's. The beef stew was, in fact, the best thing he had eaten in longer than he wanted to calculate. Hallie Brandt was 57 years old, short and broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back and the direct, unhurried manner of someone who had been feeding people for a long time and understood it as a form of care rather than a commercial transaction. She came out of the kitchen to refill his coffee and looked at Grip, who was sitting against the wall beside the booth, with his characteristic stillness. "He allowed in here?" Cade said. "He's allowed in here," Hallie said. She looked at the dog for a moment. "I heard you were at the auction this morning." "Word travels," Cade said. "Harold is not a quiet man," Hallie said. She refilled his coffee. "You doing anything tomorrow?" "I was planning to drive north," he said. Hallie looked at him steadily. She had the eyes of someone accustomed to not being told the full story and equally accustomed to not needing it. "Nora has been coming in here for Saturday breakfast every week for the past year," she said. "Since Warren died, she sits at that table by the window and has 2 eggs and wheat toast and reads the paper. She hasn't missed a Saturday." She paused. "This Saturday, she's going to have some things on her mind." Cade looked at his coffee cup. "Harold says the stew is the best thing in the county," he said. "Harold is correct," Hallie said. "The biscuits, Friday morning, are a close second." He looked at the window. Outside, the first dusting of November snow was beginning to fall through the cone of the streetlight, fine and dry, the kind that comes first and doesn't last long but is a reminder of what's coming. Grip lifted his head and watched the snow through the window. Cade had driven through 14 towns in the past 3 months. He knew the particular feeling of a place before you leave it, the weightlessness of no obligations and no expectations, the freedom that feels like freedom until it starts to feel like something else. He knew it well enough to recognize it, and to recognize also the thing that was different here, the thing that was sitting in his chest in a way that was not comfortable, but was not the same as needing to move. He stayed at the motel on Route 12 that night. In the morning, he drove to the diner. The biscuits were, in fact, a close second. Nora came in at 8:15 and sat at the table by the window, and Hallie brought her 2 eggs and wheat toast without being asked. She looked up and saw Cade, and her expression did something complicated, and then resolved into something simpler. She nodded. He nodded back. There are moments in a person's life when the ground shifts not dramatically, but decisively, the way a lock settles when the right key is turned. He did not move tables. He finished his biscuits. The decision had been made somewhere in the night, in the particular way decisions are made when you stop arguing with them. And he recognized it the way you recognize a thing you've been trying not to see. He was going to stay for a while. Carla Gillette arrived the following Friday in a rental car with 2 suitcases and a quiet fury that she kept carefully controlled in the way of someone who has had to manage her responses to her brother for a long time. She shook Cade's hand outside the house on Birch Street and looked at Grip, who regarded her with his ears forward and his weight neutral. "He's deciding," Cade said. "About me?" Carla said. "He's usually right," Cade said. Grip walked to Carla and leaned against her leg. She laughed, which was the first time she had laughed all day. She put her hand on the dog's back. "Okay," she said. Becca and Dennis's attorney reached an agreement 3 weeks later that returned the full $41,000 credit balance to Dennis's responsibility and removed Nora's name from the instrument entirely. The agreement was reached without a court proceeding, which Becca said was unusual but not surprising given that the alternative for Dennis would have been a formal elder financial exploitation filing, which carried specific legal exposures he was not eager to test. Dennis did not come to the house. He sent a letter. Nora read it at the kitchen table with Carla beside her and told Cade afterward that it was not a good letter, but it was a real one, which was more than she had expected. Glenn's careful review of the deed filing uncovered a lean discrepancy that, once corrected, left the house on Birch Street unencumbered and clear in Nora's name alone. It was December when Cade carried the last of his gear from the motel to the rented room above Hallie's garage, which Hallie had offered at a rate that was obviously subsidized, and which he had accepted with the understanding that the driveway got shoveled and the porch lights got fixed and whatever else came up. It was a small room with a window that faced east. In the mornings, the light came in level and cold, and particular in the way that mountain-adjacent light is particular, different from anywhere else. Grip liked the window. He would sit in front of it in the mornings with his ears up and his eyes moving across whatever the day had brought. And Cade would drink his coffee and watch him and think about the things that had been true before, and the things that were different now. On the Saturday before Christmas, Nora brought the Silver Star to Hallie's diner. She had it in the display case in her canvas shopping bag. She set it on the table in front of Cade and Carla and Hallie, who had come out of the kitchen because Saturday was slow and the company was good. She said she had been thinking about where it should be. She said she had thought about the house. She had thought about the veterans of foreign wars posts 3 towns over. She had thought about sending it to the Marine Corps Museum, which accepted decorations from families who wanted them preserved. She said she had decided that Warren would have wanted it, where it could be seen by someone who understood what it represented. Not as an artifact, but as a fact about a particular person on a particular day. She looked at Cade. He looked at the display case. He said he would keep it until she decided otherwise. She said she had already decided. Grip was under the table. He had his head on Nora's foot, the way dogs do when they have made their choice about a person and have no further commentary. The snow outside Hallie's window came down steady and soft in the way that Montana snow does when it's not in a hurry, covering the street and the parked trucks and the bare oak tree at the corner with the patient indifference of something that has been doing this a very long time. Cade looked at the display case. Warren Allen Gillette, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. A man he had never met who had done the thing a person does when the moment asks it of them, and had then spent 50 years keeping it in a sock drawer, because the medal was the public record and the man was the private one. He thought he understood that distinction now better than he had that morning in November when he had parked across the street from a community center and sat for 11 minutes deciding whether it was his business. Some things are everyone's business. He closed his hand over the edge of the display case. Outside, the snow kept falling over Heller, Montana, covering the streets and the mountains and the particular geography of a place that was, without his having precisely intended it, starting to look like somewhere he knew. There are people in this world who will tell you that the things we carry, the decorations and the losses and the promises made in the worst moments of our lives, belong only to us. That may sometimes be true. There are other things, given under fire in places most people never see, that belong to the larger record of what human beings have been willing to do for one another. Cade did not think of himself as someone who intervened. He thought of himself as someone who paid attention, and who had learned, slowly and imperfectly, that attention paid at the right moment is not nothing. The Silver Star sat on the mantel above the gas fireplace in the rented room above Hallie's garage, in its hinged velvet case facing east. Grip slept beneath it, leapt. May you find the room where you belong, and the people who make it real. May you know the moment when movement becomes staying, and may you have the courage to let it. May God bless you and protect everyone you carry with you.